15th of March 1944, a concealed position near Caen, northern France. A German artillery crew loads another shell into their 88mm gun, the same practiced movements they have performed hundreds of times before. The gunner pulls the lanyard. Instead of the familiar recoil and the satisfying thump of ordnance leaving the barrel, there is something else entirely. A catastrophic detonation within the breech. Metal fragments scream outward. The gun is destroyed. 3 men are dead instantly, 2 more fatally wounded. In the confusion of battle, the survivors assume a direct hit from Allied counter-battery fire. They would be wrong. The shell had been sabotaged before it ever left the factory, poisoned by a liquid so simple that its components could be found in any chemistry laboratory, yet so devastatingly effective that it would turn Germany's own ammunition into a weapon against itself. This is the story of how British intelligence created a substance that could be deployed by untrained resistance fighters in occupied Europe, required no specialised equipment, and transformed enemy ammunition dumps into ticking time bombs. A liquid that made artillery pieces explode from within, that turned the German war machine's logistics network into its own worst enemy, and that generated a creeping paranoia far exceeding its actual material impact. The British called it Operation Braddock V. The French resistance had their own names for it. The Germans, when they finally understood what was happening, called it sabotage of the most insidious kind. Because unlike conventional explosives or mechanical sabotage, this attack came from chemistry itself, invisible, undetectable until the moment of catastrophic failure, and capable of being administered by anyone who could access an ammunition store for just 30 seconds. By late 1943, the strategic bombing campaign and resistance actions across occupied Europe had created significant disruption to German war production. Factories were hit, railway lines blown, supplies interdicted. Yet despite these efforts, German artillery continued to function with terrifying effectiveness. The Wehrmacht's logistics network, built on Prussian organisational principles refined over decades, proved remarkably resilient. Ammunition dumps were heavily guarded, shells were manufactured in dispersed facilities, and quality control remained rigorous. The German 88mm gun, in particular, had established itself as perhaps the most effective artillery piece of the war, equally capable against aircraft, tanks and fortified positions. Traditional sabotage methods faced severe limitations. Explosives were bulky, required training to use effectively, and their deployment involved substantial risk of detection. Placing conventional charges in ammunition dumps necessitated penetrating heavily guarded perimeters, carrying incriminating materials, and having sufficient time to plant devices. Even when successful, such operations typically destroyed whatever immediate supplies were present, but the Germans simply shipped in replacements. Within days or weeks, the same dump would be operational again. Mechanical sabotage of the shells themselves presented different challenges. Artillery shells of the period consisted of precise mechanical assemblies. The fuse mechanisms were particularly sophisticated, designed to detonate at specific moments, whether upon impact at altitude or after a preset delay. Tampering with these mechanisms required both technical knowledge and considerable time. A saboteur would need to disassemble each shell, alter its components, then reassemble it so perfectly that it passed inspection. This was simply impractical at scale. Moreover, German ammunition underwent testing protocols. Samples from production batches were fired on proving grounds. Visual inspections checked for obvious defects. Any mechanical tampering ran a high risk of detection either during these checks or when the shells were being prepared for firing. The consequences of discovery were not limited to the saboteur. The German response to detected sabotage was predictably brutal. Mass executions, destruction of entire villages, collective punishment designed to make the local population itself police against resistance activity. What British intelligence required was something entirely different, a method of sabotage that was invisible to inspection, that required no technical knowledge to administer, that could be applied in seconds rather than minutes. That required no bulky equipment or obviously incriminating materials. That would not cause immediate destruction, but would render the ammunition catastrophically dangerous to the Germans themselves when they attempted to use it, and ideally something that would generate uncertainty and fear far beyond the actual number of sabotaged rounds, forcing the enemy to question the reliability of their entire ammunition supply. The challenge seemed almost impossible. How do you sabotage a precisely engineered artillery shell without leaving any visible trace? How do you create a weapon that anyone can deploy that requires nothing more sophisticated than a small bottle that transforms enemy ammunition into a suicide weapon, and that does all this while remaining completely undetectable until the moment of firing? The answer came from the chemistry section of the Special Operations Executive, working from their facility at Station 12 in Hertfordshire. The scientists there, many of them recruited from university laboratories and industrial research departments, had been tasked with creating tools for unconventional warfare. Their work ranged from explosive devices disguised as household objects to incendiary compounds that could be concealed in cigarette packets. But this particular project required thinking about sabotage from an entirely different angle. Instead of destroying ammunition externally, what if you could make it destroy itself? The breakthrough came from understanding the chemistry of propellants. Artillery shells of the period used cordite as their propellant, a mixture of nitrocellulose, nitroglycerin, and petroleum jelly formed into cylindrical grains and loaded into brass cartridge cases. Cordite was designed to burn in a precisely controlled manner, generating gas pressure that accelerated the shell down the barrel. This controlled burn was essential. Too slow, and the shell lacked velocity. Too fast, and the pressure spike could burst the barrel itself. The British chemists identified a substance that would fundamentally alter cordite's burning characteristics: nitric acid. Specifically, concentrated nitric acid, readily available from industrial sources, which could be diluted to a working concentration that was easier to handle. When nitric acid contacted cordite, it initiated a chemical reaction that degraded the propellant structure. The nitrocellulose matrix began to break down. The carefully controlled burning rate was compromised. Most critically, the reaction created compounds that acted as catalysts, accelerating the burn rate catastrophically. The effect was not immediate. A shell contaminated with the acid mixture would appear perfectly normal. It would pass visual inspection. It could sit in storage for weeks. But when loaded into an artillery piece and fired, the heat and pressure of ignition would trigger the degraded propellant to burn far faster than designed. Instead of a controlled deflagration pushing the shell smoothly down the barrel, there would be a near instantaneous detonation. The pressure would spike beyond anything the gun was designed to withstand. In many cases, the shell itself would detonate while still in the barrel or breach. The practical formulation developed at Station 12 consisted of a mixture that was approximately 30% nitric acid by volume, combined with water and a small amount of surfactant to help it penetrate. This concentration was chosen carefully. Pure concentrated acid was difficult to handle and could injure the saboteur. Too dilute, and the effect was unreliable. The chosen mixture could be carried in a small glass bottle, approximately 50 millilitres, enough to contaminate perhaps 20 to 30 shells, depending on application method. The application technique was remarkably simple. German artillery shells of the period were stored with their propellant charges in brass cartridge cases, the bases of which were sealed but not welded. A saboteur needed only to tilt the shell so that the base was accessible, use a small implement, even something as simple as a nail file, to slightly disturb the crimp holding the base plate, and inject a small amount of liquid into the propellant chamber. 5 to 10 millilitres was sufficient. The liquid would seep into the cordite grains through capillary action. The saboteur would then press the crimp back into position. The entire process could be accomplished in under 30 seconds per shell. The bottles themselves were disguised. SOE produced them to resemble medicine vials, perfume samples, even fountain pen ink bottles. If challenged, a resistance member could claim the bottle contained virtually any common liquid. The acid mixture, whilst corrosive, did not look particularly suspicious, having a slightly yellowish tint that could pass for numerous legitimate substances. Manufacturing of the compound took place at Station 12 and at several smaller facilities. The exact production numbers remain classified even today, but documents that have been declassified suggest that several thousand bottles were produced between late 1943 and mid-1944. These were distributed to SOE agents across occupied Europe, who in turn passed them to trusted resistance cells. The operation was compartmentalized. Many recipients knew only that they were applying special liquid to German ammunition, not the chemical mechanism behind it. The distribution network focused primarily on France, Belgium and the Netherlands, where resistance networks were most active and where German ammunition dumps were numerous. Priority was given to areas where major German formations were concentrated, particularly along the Atlantic Wall and in regions where Allied planners anticipated future offensive operations. Each bottle came with minimal instructions, sometimes just a single sheet of onion skin paper with simple diagrams designed to be memorized and destroyed. Documenting the actual deployment of Operation Braddock V presents considerable challenges. Resistance operations were, by their nature, covert. Detailed records were dangerous to keep. Many participants did not survive the war, and those who did often had only fragmentary knowledge of the broader operation. German records are similarly incomplete, as they frequently attributed premature detonations to manufacturing defects, enemy action, or simple mechanical failure rather than chemical sabotage. What can be established is that the substance was deployed across multiple occupied territories between spring 1944 and the end of the war. French resistance networks, particularly those with members who worked in German ammunition dumps or railway facilities, were primary operators. Several accounts from resistance members, recorded in post-war debriefings, describe accessing ammunition stores and treating shells with liquid from small bottles. One particularly detailed account comes from a French railway worker who had access to a German ammunition train temporarily stopped at a marshalling yard near Amiens. Over the course of 3 nights, he managed to contaminate several dozen shells before the train continued eastward. The psychological impact may have exceeded the material damage. German artillery crews began reporting an increased incidence of barrel bursts and premature detonations. Quality control officers at ammunition factories came under suspicion. Investigations were launched, but chemical sabotage of this sophistication was not immediately considered. The Germans tested sample shells from suspect batches, but if those particular samples had not been contaminated, the tests revealed nothing. The corrosion of the propellant was internal and not visible without actually dismantling the shell, a process that was destructive and could not be applied to every round. Reports filtered back through ultra-intercepts and resistance channels suggesting growing German paranoia about ammunition reliability. Inspection protocols were tightened, but visual inspection could not detect chemical contamination. Some German units reportedly became reluctant to use ammunition from certain dumps or production facilities, even when there was no concrete evidence of sabotage. This operational impact, making German forces doubt their own supplies, was perhaps as valuable as the actual physical sabotage. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. These deep investigations into the hidden technical battles of the Second World War take considerable research to get right. The German intelligence services did eventually identify that chemical sabotage was occurring, though the exact timeline remains unclear from available records. Their response was characteristically systematic. They increased security around ammunition production and storage facilities. They investigated workers for potential resistance sympathies. They attempted to develop detection methods. But the fundamental problem remained. The contamination was invisible until the moment of catastrophic failure. The Germans had their own sabotage programs in occupied territories, but these focused primarily on mechanical devices and explosives. There is no evidence in declassified records that they developed a comparable chemical sabotage agent for use against Allied ammunition. This may reflect differences in operational priorities, or simply that German chemists did not pursue this particular avenue of unconventional warfare. The Americans developed similar concepts during the war, though their focus was somewhat different. The Office of Strategic Services, the American counterpart to SOE, produced various sabotage compounds, including abrasive materials designed to destroy engine bearings and chemical agents that could contaminate fuel supplies. One OSS compound, designated Cacolube, was designed to contaminate lubricating oil and cause engine seizures. However, there is no evidence in declassified OSS records of a direct equivalent to the British artillery shell contaminant. What made the British approach particularly effective was its elegant simplicity. The compound required no sophisticated chemistry to produce. Its application required no technical training. Its effects were both immediately catastrophic and impossible to predict. A contaminated ammunition dump contained shells that appeared identical to sound ones. The Germans could not know which specific rounds were compromised without destroying them through testing, which defeated the purpose of having ammunition in the first place. The psychological dimension was equally important. Once German forces suspected that their ammunition might be compromised, every barrel burst or premature detonation became suspect. Was it a manufacturing defect, normal wear and tear on the gun, or sabotage? This uncertainty eroded confidence in ways that straightforward attacks could not achieve. A bombed ammunition dump was clearly destroyed. A chemically sabotaged one appeared intact, but potentially lethal to use. Assessing the actual historical impact of Operation Braddock V requires acknowledging substantial uncertainties. The number of German artillery pieces destroyed or damaged specifically by chemically sabotaged ammunition is not known. Post-war assessments attempted to quantify the operation's effectiveness, but distinguishing sabotage-caused failures from mechanical failures or manufacturing defects proved difficult. German records, where they survived, often attributed barrel bursts to multiple possible causes without definitive conclusions. What can be stated with more confidence is the operation's psychological and operational impact. The contamination campaign contributed to a broader climate of uncertainty within German logistics networks. Combined with resistance attacks on railways, bridges and supply dumps, it created a situation where German forces increasingly doubted the reliability of their own supply chains. This erosion of confidence had tangible operational consequences. Units that questioned their ammunition reliability were less likely to engage in sustained artillery bombardments, conservation of shells became more extreme, and the cumulative effect was a reduction in the volume of artillery fire that Allied forces faced. The technical innovation influenced post-war thinking about unconventional warfare. The principle of chemical sabotage that was invisible to inspection, simple to deploy, and catastrophically effective became part of the repertoire of covert operations. Declassified Cold War documents suggest that similar concepts were developed for potential use in various scenarios, though the specific formulations remain classified. The operation also demonstrated the value of integrating scientific expertise into intelligence operations. The SOE's chemistry section represented a model of how academic researchers could be rapidly mobilized for military purposes. The scientists at Station 12 worked on dozens of projects beyond Operation Braddock V, creating an arsenal of unconventional weapons that expanded the possibilities of resistance warfare. Their work established precedents for how future conflicts would employ scientific knowledge in asymmetric warfare contexts. From a historical perspective, the operation represents a particular moment in warfare technology. It emerged from the specific circumstances of occupied Europe, where resistance networks needed tools that could be deployed by ordinary people against heavily defended targets. The chemical contamination of ammunition was possible because of the particular propellant chemistry used in that era and the security measures that were feasible given 1940s technology. Modern ammunition storage and handling protocols, informed partly by lessons from operations like Braddock V, would make similar operations considerably more difficult. Surviving examples of the actual bottles used in Operation Braddock V are extraordinarily rare. Most were emptied and destroyed during use. A few examples exist in museum collections, including one at the Imperial War Museum in London, displayed as part of their SOE collection. These small glass vials, unremarkable in appearance, represent an entire philosophy of unconventional warfare. That the most effective weapons are not always the largest or most obviously destructive, but those that turn an enemy's own systems against themselves. Return to that artillery position near Caen on 15th of March 1944. The destroyed gun, the casualties, the confusion. Multiply that scene by dozens, perhaps hundreds of similar incidents across occupied Europe. German gun crews dying not from Allied fire but from their own ammunition. Artillery pieces torn apart not by enemy action but by chemistry administered in darkness by people whose names the Germans never learned. Consider the asymmetry. A French railway worker with a small bottle, 30 seconds of access to an ammunition wagon. Against that, the entire German logistics network, the factories, the inspectors, the guards, the transportation system. All of that infrastructure rendered unreliable by a few millilitres of acid mixture. The shells looked perfect, passed every visual inspection, sat in their carefully organised dumps, and then destroyed the very guns they were meant to serve. This was not warfare as traditionally understood. No armies manoeuvred, no aircraft bombed, no tanks advanced. Just chemistry, quietly working inside brass cartridge cases, waiting for the moment when heat and pressure would trigger catastrophe. The Germans could not see it, could not prevent it once the contamination occurred, could not even be certain which ammunition was compromised and which was sound. The brilliance lay in the simplicity. Take a substance that any chemist could produce, put it in bottles that could be disguised as medicine or perfume. Distribute it to resistance members who needed no special training. Let them treat enemy ammunition in the brief moments when opportunity presented itself. Then wait for German gun crews to load their own sabotage shells. Wait for the lanyard to be pulled. Wait for the catastrophic pressure spike that would turn precision artillery into scrap metal and kill the men who served it. Operation Braddock V demonstrated a fundamental truth about warfare, that the most devastating weapons are not always the most visible. A tiny bottle of acid mixture in the right hands at the right moment could achieve what entire bomber raids could not. It could make an enemy fear their own supplies. It could turn logistics networks into liability. It could kill with a precision that no bombardier could match, because the enemy themselves would aim the weapon, load it, and fire it. That German artillery piece near Caen was destroyed not by what the Allies did to it, but by what the Germans did to themselves unknowingly at the moment they tried to use it. That distinction matters. It is the difference between being attacked and attacking yourself, between facing an external enemy and discovering that the enemy is already inside your own ammunition dumps, invisible, patient, waiting for you to pull the trigger. A simple liquid, devastating consequences. That was the genius of it. If you like my video, please share your opinion in the comments box and subscribe to the channel. Also, turn on the bell icon so that the latest videos like this keep reaching you. See you in the next video. Take care and goodbye.